right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Borowski, and I'll be your host for today. Really excited for today's event. We are heading out onto the global trail to spend a little time with Paul Salopek. So Paul is currently in Myanmar. Paul's 21,000 mile Out of Eden walk is a decade-long experiment in slow journalism, walking from Ethiopia to Tierra del Fuego, moving at the beat of his own footsteps. Paul is walking the pathways of the first humans who migrated out of Africa in the Stone Age and made the earth ours. Along the way, he's covering the major stories of our time, from climate change to technological innovation, from mass migration to cultural survival, by giving voice to the people who inhabit them every day. So today, Paul's going to talk a little bit about some of the people he's encountered along the journey who are still using their hands to make tangible things. So something that's disappearing more and more in our modern world. So I'm going to bring Paul live in with us. Paul, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you again, Joe. Glad to be with you.
All right, excellent. Well, Paul, we've got an awesome group of classrooms joining us. We've got groups tuning in via YouTube. We've got a great group of classrooms from 3 different countries joining us on camera today. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Fantastic. Well, greetings to everybody from North America and Greece. Anybody else, or are those the 2 main sources, huh?
North America and Greece, and then we should have a group tuning in on YouTube from India, and hopefully a few more groups on YouTube as well.
Great.
All right, Paul, well, I'm going to throw it to you. I'll let you take over for a little bit, and when you're ready for the screen share, just let me know.
Okay, well, welcome everyone back to the Out of Eden Walk. And I'm just going to give like a minute update for those of you who might be joining for the first time. I'm Paul, and I'm walking through the world in the footsteps of the first human beings, Homo sapiens, our species, who dispersed out of Africa way back in the Stone Age, many, many tens of thousands of years ago. And I'm a writer and a storyteller. And as I walk along, following the ancestors and their first exploration of the earth, I often pause and spend time with people. I do interviews, I watch them work, I sometimes join them in their work to understand a little bit more about their lives. And why am I doing this? Because I think that if we slow down enough, if we're attentive, if we observe and listen well, we can pick up details about people's lives that make us understand the world better and help us understand our own place in the world better, right? And that's always a pretty good thing, is to know where you stand. So I've been walking for the last 7 years, and right now I am waiting to move forward from Southeast Asia. Basically, I've been on pause for many months, partly to work on a book and partly because of this global pandemic. I noticed many of you are wearing masks. Good for you. That's what the doctors recommend to prevent the spread of this virus. And so I'm pretty much in the same boat as everybody. I'm waiting, keeping low, for the medical conditions to give me a green light to reinitiate the walk, which hopefully will be soon. So Joe, let's go ahead and start. I prepared some photographs, a map, and some videos for everybody today, because I'd like to talk about a specific thing. Now, in the past, when I've talked about my walk, I've gone through over everything. I've gone through the kind of stories that I cover, such as climate change, mass migration, public health, language, technology, what have you. But what I would like to focus on today is something a little different, something special. And Joe, is there any way to maximize that slide into slideshow format, just to get it a little bigger?
That should be better now.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So basically, again, my walk is across the world. I've been walking for more than 7 years. I've logged about 11,000 miles of traveling, almost all of that on foot. There have been small sections where I've had to kind of jump in a car in a war zone to avoid danger. And in the process, I've produced a lot of writing, right? Almost 500,000 words of storytelling. And guess what? I'm only approaching about the halfway mark on this journey. So there's a lot more to come. Next image. So here's a map of sort of what I've covered so far and sort of where I'm heading next. So you can see that I started in Africa, in the country of Ethiopia, which scientists say is one of the sites in the world where they're the oldest fossils of humans around. And then I walked through the Rift Valley of Africa, and then took a ship loaded with 800 camels and 9,000 sheep to Saudi Arabia, and walked through Saudi Arabia, walked through the Middle East, walked through Turkey, across the Caucasus, and then through Central Asia. That's kind of the middle part of the map, and then down into India. And right now, the trailhead of the walk on pause again, probably for another maybe weeks or maybe maximum a couple months, is Southeast Asia, the country of Myanmar. And when I restart the walk, I'll be walking into China, a really exciting prospect. China is an enormous country, more than 6,000 kilometers, about 3,500 miles across. It'll take me well over a year to walk across China. So I'm doing a lot of homework. Just like you folks do have to do homework for your assignments, I'm having to do a lot of homework for China, reading books, talking to Chinese experts about history, culture, and environment. And then once I leave China, I'll be walking into Russia, and then I'll take a ship over the North Pacific to a part of the world that's off the map, which is the American continent. And I'll end my journey at the very tip of South America in Tierra del Fuego, kind of the tippity tip, where scientists say is one of the last corners of the world that our ancestors reached. That's kind of my finish line, about 6 or 7 years from now. Next image. So what kind of, I'm a storyteller. My background, my education, my university degree is in biology. So I studied science, I studied the environment, but I got into journalism and I got into telling stories. What is special about walking and telling stories? This is just a quick refresher for those of you who may not have joined the walk in the past. Basically, my idea is to slow down, to get out of cars, to get out of airplanes, to get out of trains, and slow down and walk through the stories of our day so that I can better understand them, which means for me, better understanding the people who live inside those stories, right? If you hear the news, if you hear stories about politics or elections, or if you hear stories about climate change, about migration, about almost anything, there are people who are living those stories. So my idea was to kind of walk among them, spend time with them, have a cup of tea with them, maybe sleep in their house even when possible, and try to get an insight into how their lives are and how their lives are similar or different from ours and from the rest of the world. And increasingly, what's kind of cool is as the walk has gone on for year after year, it's been fun to kind of spread out the storytelling so that I'm not the only storyteller. So now it's not just me telling a story, it's all my walking partners from Ethiopia, from Turkey, from Georgia, from India, from Myanmar, who are gathering our voices together, which is kind of more like a medley of voices. And I hope this gets deeper and more common as I go on, because truly, this is a journey that is all of ours, all of us ancestrally, back deep in the past. Some great grandma or great grandpa walked a piece of this trail, so it belongs to everybody. So slow down, about 3 miles an hour or 5 kilometers an hour. That's about how fast I walk. I watch, I listen. I often join people when they're doing work, if they're farmers or if they're fishermen. And then I share as much as I can of their lives. Next image. What I'd like to talk about now, something that I've been noticing as I've walked for the past 7 years about people and what people do is their work. What kind of work do people do? Now, I'm a writer, I'm a journalist, and so I deal with not physical things. I don't deal with like wood, I don't deal with iron, I don't deal with glass, I don't deal with computer components or car parts. I deal with something called language. I deal with words. And that's very abstract, right? That's not something you can actually put your hands on. Joe is a adventurer, he's a scuba diver, an explorer, and an educator. He deals with ideas as well, sharing discoveries and the wonders of the earth with all of us learners who gather around these interactions. But what about the people who actually still make things? What about the people who use their hands to construct something useful for us in our daily life, who make a spoon, who make a vehicle, who might make our food? These kind of folks are kind of the backbone of human work. going back to day one, going back to when we were hunters, hunting across the world, making our own stone tools, making our cooking implements, making fires, making our own shelters. It's something, though, that we're missing, that we're losing more and more as machines take over the manufacture of the human world. People still make houses, people still make skyscrapers, but they use machinery to do it. People still make utensils, they might make even tools to make other tools, but it's often high technology that makes the tools. And more of us, millions more of us, are no longer doing this at all. We're doing what we're doing today. We're sitting in front of a computer, manipulating symbols, right? We're losing touch with the wisdom of the hands, this old knowledge that comes out from the fingertips connected to the mind. And I've been very privileged to see people who still hold on to this old way of being, of living, of making work and living off of your work all across the world, from farmers to carpenters to masons, all kinds of different jobs that are vanishing fast in front of an increasingly industrialized and motorized world. So that's what I'd like to spend the next 10 minutes or so walking you through some of these amazing people, the lives of these amazing people who still make things, who, when you're all grown up, may not be making them anymore because they're not passing this knowledge on to their own kids, because their own kids want to do what all of us are doing now. They want to get an education and become accountants or run a business or become engineers on computer architects or you name it. Something that is not being done with the hand, but being done on a computer screen, right? It's normal, it's human. I'm not judging that. But let's go for a journey now, a little walk, next slide, through the lives of the people who still make things. I'm starting here, the idea came to me at the very beginning of my walk, and this is a picture of leaving the Rift Valley of Ethiopia with my Ethiopian Afar nomad walking partners and their camels. When you're walking in places, you get to think about sort of what are the repeating patterns of things that I'm seeing, the way people live. I see it over and over again. And you especially get these ideas clearly when you're walking in a very barren landscape like a desert, because your mind roams freely through the thoughts of the day, of the week, of the month. Next image. And I also began thinking about who is making our stuff, right? Who's making our clothes, who's making, our eyeglasses, right? Who's making our instruments to communicate, technology. As I started to compare the kind of equipment, the kind of material things that I was carrying versus my Afar walking partners. Now, this is a picture of a typical camp in the desert. Look what's on my tarp. I've got a backpack. You can see a laptop there. There are nylon bags. There's a stuff bag that probably has a sleeping bag in it. There's a mosquito net made out of plastic, polyurethane, aluminum, all these artificial manufactured, highly technological objects. This is what I'm carrying. Next slide. And this is what I also carried to feed us, right? Look at this picture. Is there anything natural in there? I mean, even the water, the most kind of basic element to keep us alive, is inside of a plastic bottle, right? There's a tin pot, there are processed noodles, there's canned food. And this is, this is the stuff that I had to carry because I can't go hunting. I don't know how to shoot a bow and arrow like our ancestors. And this was food to keep us alive that will keep in the high heat. This was a very hot desert, 90 plus degrees every day, Fahrenheit. And so even the basic food that we consume every day is highly artificial, not made by hand anymore. Next image. And finally, this is my office. This is my traveling nomadic office of what I need as a writer, as a storyteller, as I walk across the continents. A laptop, camcorders, satellite phones, battery chargers, all this electronics, solar panels in the background, none of it made by hand, right? It's all machine made. By comparison, take a look at this next photo. Next image. This is what my Afar nomad walking partners carried. Look at that. Now take a look, see if you can pick through these items, which weighed only a fraction of all the stuff that I was carrying, right? You've got an axe at the very top. You see it lying horizontally on that mat. It's got a hand-carved wooden handle and a hand-forged iron blade. And underneath it, you've got a knife, a dagger that's in a sheath made out of camel leather. And the dagger's metal itself is also made by hand forged. You've got some cloth. Some of it is imported cheap cloth, but some of it, like down on the right, is hand woven by the communities themselves. And you've got some kind of hybrid materials there that are both combining machine-made artificial stuff like plastic, but that's been manipulated by my walking partners to make them better, to make them fit in the context. And I'm speaking specifically of that water bottle that looks kind of like upside down in the lower corner, kind of purplish color. That's a plastic pop bottle that has been recycled for use by being wrapped in a wet cloth and stitched by hand. And then when the cloth is wetted, it keeps the water cool. So it's been turned into a water cooler. So here's an example of something that you see and observe by slowing down, the differences in technology and materials that we use, me compared to my walking partners, that triggers this idea of what's happening to all the people who used to be making this stuff for centuries or thousands of years as they no longer do it. And what is lost when we forget the wisdom of the hands, when we forget how to make things with our own hands. Next image. This was a quote that I pulled out of one of my stories. This is a writer who came to mind as I was contemplating my journey, is that sometimes, like walking through a desert, which is very, seems to be barren, seems to be flat, there are no features to lay the eye on. When you take things away that are distracting, that's when you start to learn. That's when you start to focus. And I like this idea because it applies to the wisdom of the hands, of the handmade world. Because if you don't have a giant machine to make stuff for you, if you don't have a plastic making machine, if you don't have an oil industry to feed the raw materials into the plastic machine, you rely on your hands and your mind. And so you are taught wisdom by not having things. Next image. So these are the questions that I began asking as I walked out of Africa and across the Middle East and into Asia is, who or what builds the manufactured world that we all live in, right? Now I'm sitting in a human-made structure. Many of you are sitting in a human-made structure with climate-controlled air. The temperature and the air is regulated through electronic devices automatically. Who builds this stuff? And of all this stuff that surrounds us, starting with our clothes, to our food, to our pen and paper, to our computers, to our phones, our shoes, is it made by the human touch, by human muscle, or is it made by machines? Next image. I'll give you a couple examples of how radically different, how very different a handmade world can be from a manufactured, artificially or motorized manufactured world. I'll give you the contrast of two communities that I've walked through. This is a photo of Baku in Azerbaijan on the Caspian Sea. And it's the capital of Azerbaijan, a country that's become wealthy because it's sitting on top of large oil and gas reserves. And so their capital city, it's very nice. You can see it looks, lovely. It's got, a Ferris wheel. It's got skyscrapers made out of glass. It's got beautiful architecture. But what do you notice about it? It's made of highly processed materials. It's not made too much of materials that are just found laying around in nature, right? It's been processed to build this city for all these people. And notice also how straight things are. They're like made by a ruler, a line on a ruler. And what strikes me as I've walked across the world is that nature isn't that way. Nature's like this. Nature loves curves and bends and imperfections. Human mind likes things very straight, sharp angles. This is a sharp angled modern city. Take a look at a handmade city. Next image. So thousands of miles later, walking through the country of Uzbekistan, I walk through this city called Khiva. And it's a famous old Silk Road trading hub that hundreds and hundreds of years ago was a center for all sorts of trade, not just silk, but gold, technologies like paper were traded here, animal skins, luxury items like porcelain coming from China, going to Europe. And this city, which is located in a desert, grew very rich and very wealthy. And back then, people relied less on processed machinery, machine processes and industrial process, and built almost everything by hand. What do you notice about this town, about this setting? First of all, it's lower, right? It's not got these very high structures that can only be made using high tensile steel, modern steel. The second thing is look at the color. What does it tell you? It's made out of the materials that are found in that part of the desert. A certain kind of stone, a certain kind of earth, a certain kind of clay, a certain kind of brick. Next image. So this is what a typical street in Khiva looks like today. Look at the walls. Look at there's nothing like machined about them. They're all handmade. They're slightly crooked. They're not perfect. They're not like drawn on an application on a laptop, right? For perfectly straight lines. And the second thing is, look how intimate these streets are. They're narrow. They're not built for like a stream of cars. They're built for walking or maybe a camel cart. And there's something nice about this. It's human scale. It feels good to walk down a street in Khiva because it just feels like you can reach out both of your arms and touch the walls. It's a city that's built on the scale of the human body. And somehow it just feels more comfortable. Next image. And yet, take a look at this image. This is the inside of a palace from the 18th century in Khiva. Look at this beautiful detail. That's a pillar, hand carved, intricately carved. And then all of those blue and white surfaces on the walls that are very high. We're talking, this is probably, 30-foot high walls. That's handmade tile. Each individual tile is made by some artisan, some artist, and many tens of thousands of them go into making those walls. And then a beautifully ornamented ceiling even. When you walk into this space, when I walked into it, I just stopped breathing. The beauty was overwhelming. Next image. So what does it take to make a city like Khiva? It takes gentlemen like this, a fine carpenter who's still using these, look at these traditional tools, hand tools, to make very finely filigreed carvings on furniture, on wall panels, on doorways, on doorway arches. And this kind of work is disappearing. Fewer and fewer people are doing this. It's getting harder and harder to find craftsmen and women who have these skills that take a lifetime of investment to be good at. And so this is what I'm talking about when I say that these are threatened human ways of being. These are, you think about endangered species in the environment. You think about historic buildings that might be crumbling down that are worth saving. You might think about the vanishing of human languages. Whether you know it or not, there's a massive die-off of human languages now. Hundreds and hundreds of languages are fading away because fewer and fewer people are speaking them. They're learning English or another global language, Chinese. So this is a way of being. This is a human quality of using the hands to build a built environment, to build tools to make life easy. That is fading away. These are threatened skills. Next image. So what is one of the handmade skills, the wisdom of the hands that still is in all of our houses right now? It's one of the few things, right? It's food preparation. Probably most of you, you either your mom and dad or yourself, you pitch in, still prepare your own meals, right? And so here's one artifact of human existence that goes way back to the very beginning that most of us still do. It's one of the last, right? But even in our case, in societies that are relatively wealthy, that are industrialized, that depend on machinery, our food is processed. It comes in plastic. It comes in, it comes frozen. I just want Joe to show a 1-minute video of these women in a village in northeastern India preparing rice by hand the way it's been done since time immemorial. So, you know, it's laborious. It takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of time to prepare food from scratch. And that's another reason why this is going away. And I'm not at all blaming the villagers of that village if they suddenly had access to packaged and processed food. It opens up time in their day to do something else. That said, there's something I would say as a storyteller and as a human being, very beautiful still about being able to process what you take in every day from the very, very start, from harvesting off the land to preparing it with your hands to cooking it and consuming it. It's a very old way of being human. And it also is a way of gathering communities. You know, we still sit around a table to eat, and food preparation, often done by women in societies today, they do the majority of the food preparation, is an occasion to gather and exchange information, to talk, to pass the time of day, and try to make what is a pretty onerous job a little bit more pleasant. Next image. Here's another example of just pure innovation. Talk about wisdom of the hands. This is Awad Omran. He is my walking partner in Saudi Arabia. He's Sudanese. And one day he started gathering up trash alongside the trails that we were walking. He gathered up a discarded plastic bottle. He picked up a piece of a flattened old cardboard box. He found some plastic twine. He found an old burlap sack that was full of dust. And at the end of the day, I watched him make a refrigerator. This is Awad's refrigerator. As you can see, he basically takes the water bottle, wraps it first in the old cardboard, and then around that sews almost like a case of burlap. And it does the same thing that I told you earlier about the other Nomads water bottles, that when you wet this and hang it off the camel, within an hour, that water is cool. And on a really hot day, and in this case in Saudi Arabia, it got up above 100 degrees every day. That water was just delicious. And here's a case of kind of recycling in a sustainable way old materials into something new. And I would even argue that it's quite beautiful. You can see it down in the lower corner, the red cap with this lovely old burlap wrap around. It's nice. Next image. And in Myanmar, I had the great honor of walking into somebody's cart making shop. These ox carts are still being used in Myanmar. They're fading away because Chinese-made tractors are now replacing them. So you're seeing fewer and fewer of them. But for the first time in my life, at least, I watched closely how these men, they're called wheelwrights and cartwrights, make an ox cart. Take a look at how they're making an iron rim to put on an ox cart wheel. And it looks like ballet. It looks like dance. Take a look. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing the accumulation of centuries of refined knowledge to create an extremely refined piece of technology, a cartwheel. Who would have thought a cartwheel could be so amazing? think about it. It has to be perfectly circular. If it's a little bit out of alignment, it's going to make the cart bump. So they use hand tools to create a perfect wooden teak wheel. And then to protect it from the stones on the roads and in the fields, they fit it with an iron rim that's made by hand. But first they heat up that rim till it's red hot. And why? Because steel expands. So that rim is just a little bit bigger. They fit it over the wheel. The wheel catches on fire. This rim is so hot. And when they pour water on it, that steel rim shrinks and locks onto that wheel. It'll never fall off. This kind of knowledge, this kind of wisdom, this kind of technology is being lost. And the gentleman who ran this workshop, U Thanh Nguyen, was under no illusions that even though his son was taking over the shop, that by the time his son's career ended, nobody would be making these wheels anymore because they would be replaced by modern industrial tractors. Next image. Here's a case, a strange case of even making medicine by hand, right? So I was walking across the steppes of Kazakhstan when an old shaman, kind of a medical healer using natural herbs and minerals and even animal products to cure local people, because these communities were so remote, the hospitals were very far away. So they had to rely on local folk knowledge of using natural materials to heal themselves. In this place, an old shaman said, Paul, if you need something to disinfect a wound on yourself or on your cargo horses, what you do is you find a hedgehog, that's the hard part, and you have to take the skin off the hedgehog. You know, I didn't kill any hedgehogs. We found a dead hedgehog, I promise. And we burn the skin, the spiky skin on the hedgehog, into a fine powder. And when you mix that with cooking oil and you apply that ash to a wound, it keeps the bacteria out and it helps sterilize the wound and helps that wound close to a clean scar. So take a look at how this is done.
It's like gunpowder. State. Come on. And then show it. Medicine Center, doctor. Yes. Baltimore City. PhD. In handmade medicine.
So next image. Basically, I just want to leave you with this thought. I want all of you to think about when you go back to your classes today or when you go home, what surrounds you in your school and what surrounds you in your house that is still made by hand, right? How much of it is still made by hand? How much of it is made by machines? And as convenient as machine-made objects are, and I use them all the time, I probably could not survive without them. Think about the beauty of handmade objects and why we love them so much. Why do we go to arts and crafts fairs to buy handmade stuff? Because there's something in them of the person who made them. And that doesn't happen with machine-made stuff. It's almost like you're transmitting something special from the person whose hands made this. And this last image, one quick anecdote. This is another faith healer. This is a woman, a Bedouin woman in Saudi Arabia, who is healing people using red hot nails. She heats those nails up in a fire and applies them at certain nerve points along the body to cure people. So she is probably the last person in her community to do this. So this knowledge is vanishing fast. So with that, I'll close out and happy to answer any questions. And it doesn't just have to be about the handmade world, of course, but if you do, happy to answer anything.
All right, I'm just going to come back from that screen share there, Paul. There we go. Wow, Paul, that was awesome. What a great little journey that you took us on. And I couldn't help but be drawn to the hands and just, how you can see what they put into it and the toll it takes working
Yes.
by hand like that. Those were some powerful images. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today, Paul.
You bet.
All right. Well, let's start meeting some classrooms. Those tuning in via YouTube, feel free to send in some questions. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Let's go to our first camera classroom here. Let's go to Ohio. We have some high schoolers hanging out with Mr. Greg. Let's bring them in live here. There they are. How are we doing, Ohio?
Well, there we go. Yeah, we're doing well. How about y'all?
Doing good.
Good. Yeah, this was kind of impromptu for us, and we had a little class change, and these guys kind of came in late. But we appreciate just the opportunity to hear what you're doing, Paul, and we think it's amazing. And wow, I'm kind of thinking, just questions that I'm going to ask these guys when we're done. And one of the things is just, I don't know, like what would, if you had to give this a title, what would you give it? What would your title of his talk be? Yeah, it's neat that you just completely, I don't know, just walked in here and saw that. But I can really connect to, what you talked about with, you mentioned the endangered species and how, that, and this is a AP environmental science class. So this is kind of like a low level college, college credit, environmental science class. And, just that idea of that these, I don't know, that these trades and these abilities of humans is going away. And, you mentioned the languages too, and that's something that we've talked about in class also. And, yeah, I don't know. I guess I haven't really thought about it like that.
Something that, just listening to you speak is it's firing off an idea here too, is that, if you're going to study environmental sciences, if you're going to study and measure human impacts on the environment in whatever capacity, whether it's, damming rivers or the effect of humans on climate change, keep in mind as a scientist that probably one of the great reservoirs of knowledge is traditional knowledge. So, if you're going out into the field as a biologist or as a climatologist or a zoologist or a botanist, if there are local indigenous communities around that have lived with those, lived in those habitats and coexisted with those ecosystems since, day one, they are deep wells of information and knowledge. And I think there's a whole new branch of environmentalism that is coordinating with indigenous communities. And I can put you in touch with people who are actually actively pursuing this field of study up in the Arctic. That you really, it not just behooves you, it's almost like a huge loss if you don't communicate with indigenous communities who know these skills, who know the plants, know the animal products, who know everything, about the environment that's used for human consumption, but therefore have a deep understanding of how those ecosystems work.
Like the hedgehog, right?
Like the hedgehog. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's amazing.
All right. Very cool. Let's take a little shift here. Let's jump over to Kincardine. We're going to go to Canada this time, Paul. We've got some grade 7s hanging out with us in Kincardine. Let's bring them in live.
How did you decide to do this? Why did you decide to do this? And how did that fun with?
So she just asked, how or why did you decide to do this? And how is your walk funded? And how do you get supplies for your travels?
Good. Well, it's funded partly through hedgehog medicine. But the truth is I have a collaboration of partners. It's kind of a caravan of partners, philanthropic institutions, education institutions. There are 4 or 5 of them. National Geographic Society, the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, the McCormick Foundation, the Abundance Foundation. I could go through a list, but basically I could not do this without these partners. who took a risk to fund such an unusual idea as walking across the world for years to record what I encounter, and also to pass the notepad and the microphone on to the people that I'm walking among, to have them tell their own stories for themselves. So that's how it works, kind of, structurally, the walk. Why did I do this, or how did I get onto this track? I'd been a traveling international journalist for many years. I was based in Africa, and I covered all kinds of stories. And if you're a reporter, you live a pretty fast-paced life. You live on deadline, and often more than one deadline in a day. But the kind of journalism that I was doing, I had great editors in Chicago and at the Chicago Tribune, is that they saw the value in slowing down, even when I was working at the newspaper, and not trying to break news every hour or every day, but stepping back and taking a breath and spending time with people living, say, in the Congo, or living in Kosovo, or living in Iraq, and trying to understand a little more about their lives, to give context and understanding and more analysis to the news. So it was a natural evolution from that to just starting to walk through stories. I've been drawn to stories that are on the kind of the so-called margins of the news, outside of the power centers of the world, which are generally in the Northern Hemisphere, because I have a philosophy that where the real change is happening is not in the center. It's on the edges. It's these interfaces, these frontiers, these borders where new ideas are sparking and popping up that then get adopted by centers of power. So those places are often underprivileged areas that are not economically privileged. And so, there are not an abundance of highways and rail lines and airports. So I did an awful lot of walking already. And so it wasn't too big of a step to kind of just say, okay, you know what, I'm going to get off the car and the airplane entirely, and then connect stories footstep by footstep along the pathways of the ancestral discovery of the earth. So it was kind of a natural, organic evolution of my own career. It wasn't like I woke up one day and said, oh, I'm going to leave a newsroom and leave my car keys behind and just go walking. I've been sort of doing the same thing even before I started the walk. Joe, I think you're muted.
I am muted. There we go. Another great question. So we're going to slide over to some third graders in Chicago with Mrs. Pereira. Let me bring them in here. Hey, third graders.
There you go. Hello.
When do you plan on stopping your walk?
I love that question because a lot of people ask me that, not just you, but my editors and my book publisher and people I love in my life. The idea is the walk started originally in Africa. When I set out, I thought it would take about 7 years. And boy, that was a joke. I really, my math was, I've always been bad at math, but not this bad. I'm barely kind of reaching the halfway point, and it's already been 7 years. So if I continue, if there are no more unforeseen obstacles like the COVID-19 pandemic that has stopped me for many, many months now, if I can, continue moving, inching along, 6 or 7 years, I should be able to reach my destination at the tip of South America. I don't walk the same amount every day. Some days I walk a mile. Sometimes I walk 20 miles. It just depends on the storytelling. The storytelling is what drives the project.
All right. I love how that question comes up every event that we do together. It's just not one we can answer right now.
Yes.
All right. We're heading to Pittsburgh. We've got a 9th grade civics class hanging out with us. How are we doing, Pittsburgh?
Good. We're doing good. How are you? Thanks, Paul, for doing this.
My pleasure.
So I have 2 questions here. Go ahead first.
All right. What's the scariest moment over there you ever had? I mean.
Yeah, it's a good question. The scariest time and the scariest kind of confrontation. I've walked through a couple conflict zones almost from the very beginning, actually. In Ethiopia, they were pastoralists, camel herders who were fighting each other over limited grass and water supplies, and they were shooting each other with weapons, with Kalashnikovs. And so we had to kind of deviate from our intended path and have dry camps at night with no fires to not draw any attention, to kind of sneak through war zones. In the Middle East, in the West Bank, I got caught in the crossfire of a confrontation between Israeli soldiers and Palestinian protesters. And then I was ambushed a couple times in Turkey because I was mistaken for being like a combatant, a militant, or a guerrilla. So that's kind of in a nutshell in terms of like, my hair turning white. It was actually a bit darker when I started out. But by and large, I must say, I have to throw this out whenever I get this question. I can tick off these examples for you really easy because they're so few. I've been walking more than 2,500 days and nights. And what have I given you? Maybe 4 days, 5, when I had trouble. 99% of the time, it's friendly. People are amazingly welcoming. They don't even know my language. They don't know who I am. They might think I'm a lunatic. They might think I'm crazy, but it doesn't stop them from being hospitable. So what I like to remind people who are like watching a lot of violence and chaos and war on the news is that the world is not that way. It's on the news because it's so unusual and so strange and it's dramatic. And, if you're walking through a village and there's a house on fire, guess where your attention goes, right? It's to the house on fire. It's not to the 127 other houses where people are cooking and raising babies or studying, right? The world's a fairly peaceful place. And the fact that I'm talking to you 7 years into a walk that's covered 11,000 miles and I'm still, knock on wood, healthy and have most of my faculties intact is a testament to just how hospitable the world really is across cultures, languages, you name it. Good question.
Wait,
When was the last time you talked to your family? How often do you talk to them?
What's up is a wonderful thing. Almost, every few days, I talk to them, and this device, it's both a curse and a blessing, right? You can really get sucked into it and lose all your bearings and never look up. I turn it off when I'm walking, except to use to navigate. I use, Google Earth to kind of find my way through places where there are no obvious pathways. But it really has changed. I don't, your question makes me think, what is the biggest difference between my walk and the walk of the ancient people who spread out of Africa, our grandfathers and grandmothers, because we're all African, way back, 60 or 70,000 years ago. And I can name technology like, high-tech shoes or the access to food, the access to infrastructure, modern medicine. But I think it really is this. It's this ability to stay in contact with anybody on the planet. Think about it, like 7.7 billion people, assuming they carry this device, and today most do. It's the mind hive is bigger than it ever has been. And so that's the biggest change, I think, between the Stone Age and my walk is if I want to be, I can be constantly in touch almost with anybody in the world, including you, thankfully.
All right. And we have been enjoying that connectivity for the last, 4 or 5 years doing these events live with classrooms. So it's been absolutely great.
It's a lot of fun.
Okay. Miss Johansson's class joining us in Connecticut. Let's bring them in live with us. How are we doing, Connecticut?
Hi, Paul. I have a question from one of my students who injured herself this weekend and is now on crutches. So she's wondering what happens to anyone on your team who's walking with you who gets sick or injured while you're out walking.
It's a really good question. And it's a serious question. And it's one that, injuries or sickness are far more at the front of my mind than like violence. The chance of violence is almost trivial, but getting hurt or getting sick is a possibility. So I carry a medical kit with me. I underwent some training, first aid training, to learn the basics of how to treat trauma injuries and how to treat the very basics of symptoms for diseases. But I also, when I've gotten sick or when my walking partners have gotten sick, we rely on the local health infrastructure, wherever that may be. I'll give you a couple examples. So in Saudi Arabia, one of my walking partners, Mohammed Banuna, had a terrible problem with his abdomen. He had some surgery that was coming apart, and he didn't tell me. And he was trying to be, a good partner and didn't want to cause any trouble. But became big trouble because he was not paying attention to it, not tending to it with a doctor. So we had to medevac him. We actually stopped the walk. I got on a satellite phone. I called a vehicle to come, emergency vehicle to come pick us up and take us to a hospital. And I joined Muhammad all the way back to the capital where he lived in Riyadh to make sure that he was okay. So there's that. And then when I've gotten sick, I just go to local clinics. I go to local doctors or local shamans. I mean, I've gone to faith healers on many occasions, actually. And they use local traditional knowledge, whether it's herbs or faith, laying on of hands. So I avail myself of both the ancient and the new when it comes to keeping healthy.
All right. Well, we're going to take a little trip to Greece now. We're going to visit Mrs. Mayu, who's joining us, and she is a coordinator for kindergarten classroom. So let me bring her in live here. There we go.
Hey,
Hello. Hello from Greece. Hi, Paul. I'm really excited because I've been following your trip since, since 2013. I have even a picture of you from Georgia that came to our kindergarten. So we have a strong community of teachers here that have been following with our classes, your epic walk. And I have some questions to ask. The first one is, how essential is slow journalism during this global pandemic? And the other one is, what would be the value of wisdom of hands if shared across diverse educational settings, especially since many of us have big inequalities in terms of access to online learning?
Mm-hmm. Oh, two good questions. I as an advocate, Kyriak, it's great to see you again, as always. I must say, I've got to send out a kudos, a congratulations, because Kiyaki's been fantastic at integrating the walk's philosophy into Greek educational thinking, which is fantastic. So I thank you for that. But in terms of like the pandemic, I'm basically locked down with everybody else. So in a sense, slow journalism is very slow in this case. It's like stationary. And I think we've all become kind of slow journalists at this point of our lives. We've had to kind of stop doing the busy work that has consumed our days and hours under normal conditions and turn our attention both outward and inward about what is of value in our life. Maybe it's a good thing that among the terrible things that this pandemic has wrought, including 1.3 million people who've succumbed across the world, and many tens of millions infected, and many economies crippled by this terrible virus. I think it's forced us to stop and slow down and do some thinking. And that's sort of it's the bedrock of the storytelling that I do, is to kind of not get distracted by the speed of the internet and the speed of the information revolution, but to kind of do something that very few of us are capable of doing anymore. I mean, I include myself, is waiting, this capacity to wait for inspiration, to wait for an observation to come, to wait to get to a place by traveling slowly, and hopefully harvesting some deeper meanings from that journey. So COVID is a journey. COVID is part of this process. And it's allowed me, to be honest, I'm very lucky because nobody in my family has been afflicted, thank heavens. And this pause has given me the opportunity to really bore down on my research on China and also to finish a book. So that's what I'm doing with my COVID days and nights. In terms of spreading the wisdom of the hands through larger communities, I think I would love to see that. I mean, there's an organization in the UK dedicated to cataloging what they call, legacy crafts. They actually have a red list, just like environmental groups have a red list for vanishing or endangered species. They have a red list for vanishing or endangered human trades. And it's growing. It's doubled. The number of the trades that are going away, that are just disappearing forever, has doubled since 2007, according to this group. And I'll be happy to, put you in touch with them if you're interested. But I think it's maybe, communities like this group that, first of all, are aware that there's something that's endangered, because most of us aren't, and I wasn't. I didn't know what a cart mate, what a wheelwright did or a cart maker does until I actually stumbled across workshop and spent 4 days watching them work. Who has the time, right, these days? But it's value. I think there's a value to it. I think it's inherently human. I think the things that we make with our hands is a form of storytelling, actually. We invest our own stories in them, and it's an iterative story, maybe like a poem that gets a stanza that's repeated again and again. And when it goes silent, it's a real loss. So if you have any ideas about, how to identify and maybe amplify craftspeople, women and men who are still doing these ancient techniques of building something, I'm happy to listen and even incorporate it somehow.
All right. Great questions. Thank you so much for joining us from Greece today. I love when we have educators and students joining us from overseas. Miss Tins, third graders hanging out in Chicago. Let me bring you in live. How we doing, Chicago?
Hello.
My question is, how many cool things have you seen that you've never seen before?
What a great question. How about 100 every day?
Wow.
Right? I'm exaggerating a little bit because I don't keep track, but I can tell you that every single day that I wake up on the trail and begin to walk another day, I learn something new. Why? Because no stretch of the trail is the same as the day before. It might look it, like those pictures of the desert and the camels that I showed you. If I took another picture the next day, you might say, well, it looks kind of the same, but it doesn't. It's different. There's something small that's different. Just like in your day, if you are aware of it, if you think about it, every one of your days is different than your yesterday. So it's a learning opportunity. So I've seen many, many wonderful new things beyond counting. Good question.
All right. Well, Paul, I want to give a shout out to Manisha Joshi. She was joining us from Mumbai online today. So it was great to have her joining in. And great. Paul, I just have to say, the time just goes so fast whenever we connect together. It's so great to catch up with you after a while. It was great to have so many great classrooms tuning in via YouTube, Wisconsin, India, some more in Canada. It was great to have all of our camera classrooms from Canada, the US, and Greece, of course, as well. And again, Paul, thank you so much for another great event. I can't wait to catch up from the trail again and maybe even a new country soon.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, Joan. Thank you, students and teachers. Look forward to reconnecting in this global classroom again.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Huge thank you to you as well, Paul. Everybody enjoy the rest of your days.
Great. Ciao. Bye-bye.